Welcome, everyone. So, I am going to answer a question that I have received in many forms over the years, which is psychic abilities or highly sensitive people, is that the same as neurodivergence? And so, let's give a bit of background before I fully answer this. Elaine Aron came up with the term highly sensitive person in the 90s. And so that sort of became a part of our cultural pantheon. And shared that she believed that something like 15 to 20% of the population were defined as highly sensitive people. And through this, she shared a lot of, kind of guidelines or thoughts like, somebody who doesn't like to watch violence in movies and television is affected by that. People who don't like loud noises, a lot of stuff like that. And so I will share my own background that I've always been an incredibly sensitive person. I didn't really have context for it growing up. I just knew that the way that I perceived reality was in some way different than the people around me. Um, and so I started doing research and, kind of understanding what my experiences were. And what I found when I was doing so is that much of spirituality, occultism, whatever groups you may want to put into it, was really focused on providing information for people who wanted to develop psychic abilities, who wanted to become more sensitive, more open, more aware. There was not really much information out there for somebody like me who was really completely open and who was experiencing pretty drastic symptoms as a result of that. And wanted to learn how to, both reduce my symptoms that I was experiencing as well as, beyond developing tools, also have some context, some understanding about what I was experiencing. And so I opened up my clinical practice in 2004. I really got going more in 2005, but it started, I believe, in 2004. And what I found was that people started coming to me who were also would be termed highly sensitive, or later what I would call psychic. Um, and so through developing tools for myself, as well as understanding and hearing from so many people over the years in my practice, um, I have developed tools or shifted tools slightly that were already out there and taken that understanding of 15 to 20% of the population being highly sensitive and developed a slightly different spectrum. And that spectrum would be highly sensitive, mildly psychic, moderately psychic, and highly psychic. And so the best definition that I have for this is that imagine 5 people walk into a room. The first person notices 10 things, the second 40, the third 150, the fourth 500, and the fifth 5,000. And so that first person noticing 10 things would be kind of considered, normal, kind of what the 80% of the population tends to notice. The rest of those would be describing anything from highly sensitive to highly psychic individuals. And so I developed the spectrum for a couple of reasons. And the first is to ground psychic abilities into something that is simple, as well as something that kind of releases a little bit of the kind of romanticization and some of the harsh labels that come with talking about the word psychic. For me, that word simply means that somebody goes into an environment and they're more open than other people. They are picking up more of what is present there than somebody who would walk into that same environment, and that there is a huge spectrum of that. Obviously, somebody who's picking up 150 things and somebody who's picking up 5,000, they're having different experiences of that same room that they're walking into. And there's a lot of reasons why I'm sharing this. The first is hopefully you find it interesting and helpful. The second is that when I am sharing about the difference between neurodivergence and psychic abilities or highly sensitive person, is that my answer to that is that no, they are not the same thing. However, they do have overlap. I would consider them to be kind of the Venn diagram, where we have neurodivergence on one circle, neurotypical on the other, and then we have the kind of the joining point in which we are talking about traits that could be considered highly sensitive to psychic. And so what does this mean in reality? It means that I have met plenty of people who would be considered neurotypical that do not, that simply are more open than others. They would fit into the highly sensitive to highly psychic, um, range of things, but they're just simply more open. And so now we go to the other end of things, is that I certainly have met plenty of neurodivergent individuals who would fit into that guideline of walking into a space and picking up that 40 to 5,000 sort of bits of information, bits of stimuli, information about the room, messages, all of that sort of stuff. And so, where do the differences really lie? Over the years, I've been sent questions about this, and somebody sent me some, like, I forget if it was TikTok or Instagram rant about, somebody saying, like, oh, Elaine Aron's work was just, she didn't want to admit that who she was researching was autistic, or, people just call themselves highly sensitive if they don't want to admit that they are, really autistic or neurodivergent. And my response to that is always that there is always dangerous precedent when we treat any group as a monolith. There are certainly some individuals that would be considered neurodivergent who would fit on that spectrum of walking into the room and noticing the 40 to 5,000 things. There are also neurodivergent individuals that I have met that would walk into that room and notice 5 things. So that is certainly something to think about. The other differences that I will share that I've noticed throughout the years of working with a high degree of both people who would fit under the categories of neurodivergent, as well as people who would fit in the categories of being, highly sensitive, mildly, moderately, highly psychic, is that if we're talking about the openness to information, that basic definition I offered in terms of psychic abilities, is that some people may walk into that room and notice 10 things, but because of the state of their nervous system, because of the state of how their senses are wired, kind of the basic wiring of their system on an energetic, spiritual, and physical level, they may have difficulty processing those 10 things. That is a slightly different scenario than somebody walking into that room and interfacing with 500 things and then having difficulty processing all of those 500 things. And so, what is difficult about this is that both of those people, that person that walks into the room and notices 10 things and has difficulty processing them through their system, and the person that walks into that same room and notices 500 or 5,000 or 150 things and has difficulty processing it through their system, is that both of them may result in feeling exhausted, overloaded, overstimulated. So in some cases, the effects are similar. But, and in some cases, like, does it kind of matter? Yes, it very much does, because the person who is noticing 500 things in that room, they really need to be supported by skills and understandings um, of reality in which they can very much focus on their system processing and sorting through that stimuli. Our nervous system, our physical nervous system, as well as our spiritual nervous system, which is our chakra system. It lets information basically in and out, energy in and out. It all tries to process and sort of make sense of the inner information that we intake into our system. And so what I'm saying is, on a simple level, that person that is having difficulty processing those 10 things because of um, sensory difficulties may need different skills and tools than the person that is interfacing with 500 things and is having difficulties, because that is introducing overload to their system, even if it's the same experience, the same result. I will share some really obvious things that, people who are experiencing psychic abilities tend to have spiritual experiences. They tend to, have spiritual signs, synchronicities, see dead people, be aware of, other dimensions, all sorts of spiritual stuff. Some of them may be going through a spiritual awakening where they're noticing, past wounds and, all sorts of interest in spirituality and that sort of stuff happening. Um, and I will say that as well, that I noticed that with neurodivergent individuals that, and I don't tend to notice this as much with individuals who may be determined to just singularly be highly sensitive to highly psychic without that neurodivergent aspect, is that there tends to be more rigidity of thought and behavior, for example, diet and stuff like that, that is present in the neurodivergent community that isn't necessarily, present in the sensitive to highly psychic ability. So highly psychic community. So on some level, does this matter? Yeah, it kind of does, because different skills and tools. However, I will say that people use what labels they need to for identity purposes. There are certainly people that walk into a room and notice two things that, want to identify as being psychic for some reason or another. Um, and as well as there are people who maybe didn't get the opportunity because it's expensive, or, maybe for whatever reason don't wish to identify as neurodivergent or autistic, and they may be looking towards more spiritual explanations or trying to do what's known as spiritual bypassing, where they are utilizing spirituality to look away from problematic areas of their lives, or kind of issues that could use reconciliation within themselves. Maybe their family or what era they grew up in, it would be difficult for them to, see themselves as neurodivergent. So my simple answer is Venn diagram, circles overlapping, but plenty of people experience psychic abilities, sensitivities, who are both neurodivergent and neurotypical, and that breaking down communities from seeing them as a monolith, even if it, from seeing them as one particular thing and breaking that down into, kind of, okay, some of these things can be tendencies, but these are both groups that can be seen as individuals as well. And what gives meaning and purpose to that person as an individual, what would help that person to become healthy, to become functional or as functional as possible, is really the goal for any type of spiritual label or spiritual expression. It's great to wave around a flag and be like, oh, hey, I'm psychic or whatever that sort of thought. But really, the purpose of me putting my book out there in 2016, Managing Psychic Abilities, as well as a lot of my work, is to offer people a map, but understand, as the famous quote goes, that the map is not the terrain, and to utilize that information to bring themselves to a happier, healthier, and more peaceful existence. And a lot of people who are managing psychic abilities, who have psychic abilities, simply need some understandings and tools of how to work with them, how to get context for them, whether or not they are neurotypical or neurodivergent.